Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. I'm SocietySucks and today I'm checking out why didn't Saddam Hussein back down before the Gulf War by History Matters. Now, we all know what the Gulf War was. At least I'm assuming everybody watching knows because, come on, it's the Gulf War. How could you possibly not know about this? So I'm not gonna explain. Let's just watch the video.
In late 1990, Iraq invaded and annexed neighbouring Kuwait. This was met with international condemnation, with even the USA and USSR agreeing that Iraq needed to withdraw or face consequences. Over the next 5 months, Iraq faced diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions and a major military build-up
but they still didn't
by an
leave.
international coalition. And during this period, at no point did Iraq or its leaders make any attempt to back down or defuse the situation. Which raises the obvious question, why not? Why didn't Iraq back down in the face of all of this? So
it was obvious that they were not going to win a conflict against the US and the coalition, but they just didn't back down.
In mid-1990, Iraq-Kuwait relations were terrible. Due to its previous war with Iran, Iraq was heavily in debt, much of which was owed to Kuwait. And to complicate things, the price of oil was very low at this time, which was bad for the Iraqi economy. And furthermore, the Iraqi government accused the Kuwaitis of stealing oil from right underneath it. As such, Saddam Hussein, Iraq's leader, gave the order on August 2nd to invade, and Kuwait was conquered in no time at all. Obviously, the international community condemned this. However, Saddam wasn't worried because he knew that it would be the United States leading the charge, meaning that the USSR could be relied upon to veto and block any action. But fun fact, no. You see, the Soviet Union was currently in the midst of falling apart, and Mikhail Gorbachev, its leader, wanted—
Yup, we're talking about the year 1990. Well, 1990 to 1991, that's when the Gulf War was. Not sure what made Saddam Hussein think they could rely on the USSR at this point in time. That was just stupid, but hey.
Wanted to keep relations good with the West, in case he needed help with anything like, say, any attempted coups or whatnot. With the Soviets refusing to help, there was always China. But China was still internationally isolated due to its Tiananmen Square crackdown. Thus, aiding a country that it had little connection to—
Hey, wait, hold on a second. Tiananmen Square never happened. It never happened. Don't be fooled by the lies.
When doing nothing could improve relations with everyone else was a no-brainer. Never mind though, Saddam was still confident of overwhelming victory because of Iraq's recent war with Iran. For those of you that don't know, this war was a long and bloody stalemate. But given that Iraq was only a third of the size of its neighbour, Saddam saw this as a great victory. As such, he had a large army of veterans who would inevitably destroy the invaders. Furthermore, the Iran-Iraq war had done wonders for Iraq's image amongst its fellow Arab and Sunni nations. Saddam was able to position himself as the first and last line of defence against Shia Iran, and many of his neighbours agreed.
That's fair.
In fact, this was one of the reasons that Saddam thought he could conquer Kuwait and get away with it. His reasoning being that the rest of the Arab world was so indebted to him that they'd be happy to not only allow Iraq one tiny annexation, but they'd also go to bat for him internationally. Instead, what happened—
Wow. I mean, that was probably the worst assumption he could have ever made. There is no way he truly expected that the rest of the Arab world would side with him and risk the ire of the United States and its allies. Like, seriously? Huge miscalculation there.
What happened was that Saudi Arabia figured out that they'd likely be next and so gave refuge to the Kuwaiti government and also tried to push for direct intervention. Okay, so the USSR, China and the Arab world hadn't come through for Saddam, but his next plan was simple: wait. He and his government thought that the longer his occupation of Kuwait went on, the less interested the rest of the world would be, and eventually, they'd all move on.
That's just
the only
dumb.
moving that actually happened, though, was the movement of coalition troops to Saudi Arabia in preparation for an invasion. As such, it was time for Plan E: win friends so that the pressure would die down, and Saddam had a brilliant idea on how to achieve this: take hostages. Baghdad quickly banned foreigners from leaving Iraq and had hoped that their governments wouldn't want to risk intervention in case something were to happen.
I didn't know about this.
It will shock you to learn that this didn't endear Saddam to anyone, and so the intervention was now inevitable. With this in mind, surely it was time for Saddam to back.
The fact that he was taking hostages is just further proof that he needs to be dealt with before he does any more damage.
Back down. O ye of little faith, Saddam had many more foolproof plans for victory. The next one was simple: just win the war.
He never won,
Not
though.
by destroying the invading armies and conquering Saudi Arabia, even he knew that wasn't possible.
Okay.
But instead, his plan was to inflict such heavy casualties on the coalition that continuation was impossible. During Iraq's previous war with Iran, casualties on both sides numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and Saddam figured that Iraq, or more accurately he, could handle such casualties, whereas the coalition states would have to withdraw if that became clear.
I'm not sure how he expected that the coalition would be taking similar casualties as his forces. The coalition was superior in practically every way to the Iraq military. Not sure what the hell he was thinking. He was an idiot, okay?
Saddam assumed that this would lead to a negotiated peace where he would graciously allow the return of South Kuwait, the bit without oil. The coalition began its bombardment in January 1991, and whilst things looked bad, Saddam had yet another way to end the war on his terms: by bombing Israel. The intent was to goad Israel. Saddam had yet another way to end the war on his terms, by bombing Israel. The intent was to goad Israel into retaliating, which would allow him to frame the war as a religious one. This would inevitably lead to these nations also getting involved and fracturing the coalition's forces. The flaw with this plan was that the Israeli government saw through this and didn't respond, and so it was time for Desert Storm. 4 days later, Iraq had been expelled from Kuwait and the coalition was moving up through the south of Iraq proper. The Iraqi army was essentially ruined, and so the coalition stopped its advance and declared a ceasefire. At this point, Saddam was forced to negotiate, and he agreed to respect Kuwaiti independence and pay for any damages caused. Saddam was allowed to stay in charge, but this was on the condition that he give up his chemical weapons. And I may be wrong about this, but I think this comes up again in the future.
I mean, yeah, why didn't Saddam Hussein back down before the Gulf War? Really, you could shorten this and just say that he was a bit of a fool. He wasn't the smartest person. He made a bunch of foolproof plans, which were some of the dumbest things I've ever heard. He definitely overestimated his own forces and underestimated the coalition forces, that's for sure. He also overestimated just how important him and his country really is. He tried looking for help from the USSR, which was falling apart, and he hoped that other Arab nations would help him and go against the United States and its allies. Like, I'm sorry, but every single one of those plans just makes him look like an absolute moron. So yeah, Saddam just wasn't the smartest person. That's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. If you want to see more reactions, check out this video right here. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.